Hi, I'm Gerald Fashion, cloth knower. By the end of this video, you might just know more about fashion than me, which is kind of a lowball, since I know next to nothing about fashion. We learn a lot about a person from their appearance, and it's no wonder that we tend to make snap judgments based off of someone's clothing. We instantly know at least a fraction of who they are based on how they dress. We might even understand the country of origin or time period based off of what a character is wearing. That makes clothing both an unavoidable element, but also a really powerful tool in character design. I've long held that character design is built up of three distinct pillars: drawing, story, and design. That's even how I split up the Learn Character Design course. For clothing, and making it for characters, the same thing applies. This video is about 1. Learning to adequately understand and draw cloth and clothing, 2. Figuring out the storytelling and personality of your character and how that comes across in their clothing, and 3. The way that you can use shapes and lines to design interesting and compelling looks for your characters that reinforce that story. Drawing cloth and clothing probably seems difficult, and it's why so often people simply draw a straight line for a sleeve across an arm and call their character clothed. Part of the complexity is the fact that clothing is constantly changing shape. But let's talk about what we do know. Clothing is made of fibers. Sometimes those fibers are thick and woven together loosely, like the yarn in a sweater. Sometimes they're thin, like silk or linen. And sometimes the fibers are rigid and woven together incredibly tight, like denim. This apron is both tightly woven and has a sort of waxy substance that it's treated with, which makes it a really stiff material, which is what you want for working. This is the dollar store polo shirt that I used to make the tent on Jambarella's shop last month from the bottom of the shirt. And you can see the way that the pattern looks on a cheap fabric, and then how it starts to fray and cut apart in the places where it was cut. Now, different weaves and patterns will look a little different, but to simplify things, think of these fibers simply in a grid, with lines going one way and lines going the other. Cloth doesn't have muscles, and usually something like a garment doesn't really have structure like bones. Cloth is really a membrane, so the one force that it responds to is tension. Now, the greatest force of tension is gravity. If nothing is resisting the garment, it simply crumples to the floor. Sometimes the tension comes from the fibers themselves being made of something like spandex or lycra, where it pulls back towards a neutral shape. But the simple fact that cloth is so straightforward makes it so things like wrinkles are really explicit. We don't need to guess or add random squiggly lines, we simply need to follow the point of tension. So this is what a single point of tension looks like, along with gravity, which is represented by those green arrows at the bottom. If we add a second point of tension, it's a cape. All of our wrinkles are a lot like ripples in water. Usually there's a strong line reacting to that tension, with a few smaller ones to follow. This changes depending on the kind of fabric that you have. The idea of fabric being a grid comes in handy once we drape it onto our characters, because constructed shapes and the contour lines that make constructed shapes up are essentially a grid in 3D space. That beginner mistake that I talked about, where people draw a straight line to represent the end of a sleeve, it flattens the potential 3D shape that the garment is making. Instead, think about the simple cylinder of the sleeve and what direction it's facing. If there was a cap or lid on the end of that sleeve or cylinder, what direction is it facing? If it's towards us, the line will curve up the arm, and if it was facing away from us, it's curving down from the arm. Now, unless the material is legitimately skin tight though, a single line across the end of the sleeve is both unrealistic to the way that fabric works and doing a disservice to your designs. Remember the frayed end of this dollar store shirt? The end of fabric will start to come apart if it's left alone, which is why you'll find at the end of most sleeves and pant legs and collars, the fabric is folded back in on itself and stitched. That effectively doubles the thickness of the fabric at that point, And so it gives us an opportunity for that segment to be dimensional instead of just a line. This also means that we can see the cuff wrapping around the back of our limb instead of just stopping and following that inner line that we made. I tend to call this making a paper doll of your character because instead of adding to the depth, it looks like there's a cutout piece of paper that's stuck on top of your character, instead of part of it. For sleeves and pant legs, there are more points of tension than on our example cape, but the same principles apply. Instead of a flat square, a sleeve or pant leg is a cylinder or hollow tube. As you bend and flex the limbs on your character, the garment simply reacts to the fact that something is moving and changing shape inside of it. The same works for the torso. Usually that looks like a place like the elbow or knee where the cloth is stretched out, followed by a reaction on the other side of it where it's bunched up with wrinkles. Practicing with these principles in mind will give you most of what you need to start representing cloth more accurately, which will lead to better drawing. Definitely use reference for these things, and if you need to, create photo reference for yourself. Now, you may not have access to a beautiful, expensive 16th century ball gown, but try to create the equivalent for your purposes. I actually got one of those fabled people in my comments the other day that is like anti-reference. Do they think that artists are just purely tracing things and that's the problem? Is the idea to only draw a dog the way that you remember them, not looking at one now, and then that makes the outcome better? I mean, what if I told you to draw a Kismak brig right now without looking at it? Would that somehow be better? I made that up. Use reference. Another helpful thing is to draw the shape of the cloth first and add the details like fold and wrinkles afterward to get a stronger read. Just as an aside, to give you an idea of how cloth works, and this is a spoiler for the end of the show Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the new costume for Captain America makes a complicated shape around the neck, and even with their premiere costume making at Marvel, the folding and bunching as he turns his head needed to be edited digitally afterwards to resemble its comic counterpart and eliminate the puckering that the material made. So that's the realities of fabric, no matter how big budget your studio is. Let's talk about the story of clothes. Why are you wearing what you're wearing right now? What does your favorite outfit say about you? Have you ever tried something on that made you super uncomfortable? There's so many ideas about what clothing means in society, so just thinking about your own clothes can get the wheels turning. When deciding on clothes for your character, there's even more to think about. Are they wearing something because someone else forced them to? Does their clothing make them uncomfortable? What sort of statement are they trying to make with their clothing? Or better yet, what insecurity or flaw are they trying to mask with what they wear? Are they confident in how they look? Are they wearing something baggy to hide how they feel about their body? Are they wearing something flashy and revealing because they're perhaps even overconfident in how they look? Clothing is also usually a huge indicator of status, as in how much money you have. A few years ago, I designed a street rat character named Goodwin, whose somewhat arrogant personality insisted upon dressing like part of the posh aristocracy, leading to her clothing taking the shape of frilly, posh, extravagant clothes, but it's made of dingy rags and muddy, discarded garments. I'll retell the story that I've told before, where when I was a kid working in my dad's shop, the only shirts available were oversized for me. And because of that relation mentally, wearing something too baggy always makes me feel underqualified for whatever I'm doing, like I'm just the boss's son in shoes literally too big to fill. So there's so many opportunities like this in character design to figure out what clothes mean, instead of just giving them a slogan on a t-shirt that spells an idea out for you. On to section 3, which is all about design. This is the entire point of the fashion industry and high fashion, making the clothing say something or make a statement. Now in character design, we have the flexibility to use shapes that communicate something about our characters and lines through the design that help say something too. A large cloak or cape is a shape you can use to conceal your character or aid a feeling of something sinister. The design and shapes can build up and support the existing body shape of a character or supplement it in another way. The ideas that we talked about in story should come across here, where the character themselves is expressing themselves, potentially. But it's also about the story that we want to tell the audience about this character. For example, if we add items that make the character asymmetrical, like a shoulder pauldron or one long sleeve, we throw the character off balance, so to speak, and make them more dynamic. This could reflect where they are in a story. The same can be done with a diagonal line across a character. This can be either a poncho, a bandolier like Chewbacca, a fabric wrapping and weaving, or simply a stripe on a sweater. Does your character adjust or modify a uniform that they're given to make it their own and make some amount of personal identity from it? Color and value goes hand in hand with design as well. The colors within a wardrobe can slowly build towards a point of interest. You can choose to make certain elements uninteresting on purpose. Sometimes the legs and pants are a large area of visual rest to contrast the interesting elements of the face and hands. But you can do the opposite by calling attention to the legs with flashy pants. Maybe that highlights a character's speed, their agility, or their ability to disco. I like to say that shape language is really elastic. You can silhouette much larger, swooping shapes for your character in the thumbnail process, and then allow for the inclusion of specific elements to show the place where the character terminates, like the sleeves, the head, and the hands. Design is also the place where we can think about the utility of the character. Is it easy for them to move, to act, to do the things that we need them to? That's why I think it's just as valuable to draw your character in motion through various poses, to see how the clothing reacts, instead of just a single static front view drawing. A lot of people will get a little daunted by clothing and will just default to the simplest thing that they can because they feel like clothes are boring, or they'll end up with characters that are too flashy. But once you get a feel for using larger shapes, for segmenting those shapes out, and even fashion concepts like layering, you can wield costume and wardrobe as an essential part of your character design toolset. My course, Learn Character Design, is a comprehensive character design curriculum. It's over 18 hours of video learning. You can get it at learncharacterdesign.com. And we've got a new Bikos backpack for August, this time with an Enferglet foil trading card and parcel hard enamel pin. You can follow me at BagelDenizen on Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and TikTok. Thanks so much for watching, and have fun creating.